Hello, everyone. Welcome to IG Live, where we tell everybody that it's time to check out the live video. This is that section. Hi, Allison. Good to see you. And I don't know Jamie. I believe James and Monica. Today, I'm hoping to one day do these actually on Zoom, but we're going to start them today on IG Live, where we are doing a monthly workshop talking about something to do with writing and what, right? So I wanted to start, though, today really talking about writing in the publishing industry, which is why I am a writing coach. So I myself have spent a lot of years in book publishing. I started my career at St. Martin's Press working, I'm fixing my hair because that's what you do when you go on IG Live. But I spent the early part of my career working at St. Martin's Press in publicity, and then I moved into editorial at Simon & Schuster, where I had an amazing boss who was tired of editing books and basically started handing me all of his books to edit, which included a lot of the big gurus of self-help at that time, like Dr. Phil, for better or worse, and Dr. Stephen Covey, who was a very nice man that put way too much pepper on his eggs. It's very strange, a lot of black pepper, Tony Robbins, and a lot of other sort of high-profile big male self-help dudes, including Stedman Graham. But we also had a really other interesting list. The other side of it, oh, Faith, I'm so excited to hear that. The other side of the list was actually contemporary Black female fiction. So I edited a very wide genre of books and really got to learn from an early age, not only how to tell a story, but what book publishers are looking for when they buy those stories. So a major piece of being an assistant, especially, but as you continue to move up the ranks, obviously that scales, is reading proposals and reading query letters and reading manuscripts and determining what your boss is going to see, how that book is ultimately going to be pitched and sold up the chain. So I wanted to share a little bit about that inside info today, so folks who are looking to get published can have a better sense of how the book publishing industry works, and then the different options for you as a aspiring author and some of the best places to go. So again, my personal publishing experience from an editorial or corporate perspective was in big book publishing. So I worked at Simon & Schuster for a couple of years, and then I went on to work at HarperCollins with Judith Regan. And so in both of those experiences, I saw sort of the machinations of really big four traditional book publishing, which, for those who don't know, that system is really based on a couple of things. One, gatekeeping. So most of the big traditional book publishers will not actually look at a proposal or manuscript without an agent, even if you have a friend. And the reason why they want an agent is because they are likely offering you a book advance. And in order to give you that advance, they want someone who's going to negotiate that deal for you. And your agent basically functions almost like an attorney in that way. So they're managing the paperwork. They're helping to get you, as much as they can get you. Agents typically take 15%. So if anybody's quoting you anything higher than that, that is certainly above industry standard. Some that are starting out maybe would quote lower than that, though I don't know an agent that takes anything less than 15%. But so they have to earn something for that 15%, right? And so that agent will come in and negotiate with the publisher, help to get the paperwork, and really kind of guide you through the publishing process. So that's what it looks like in big traditional publishing. And I will say this about doing this on IG Live. I really wanted to have things that I could hold up and you could read, but the problem is you're going to read them backwards here. So, and I have yet to figure out how to make that any different. I was like, is there a way for me to fix that? Maybe, I'm not sure, but that's the weird thing is you can't really practice an IG Live. So I will maybe offer some notes in the comments after this is done so that you all can get some of these big pieces. So traditional book publishing usually comes with a standard advance. And it also comes with a thing called royalties. You might have heard of this before. This is where you get a percentage off of the copies that you've sold. Now, most royalty rates run somewhere between 7.5% and 15% off of net sales, net profit, which is after all of your expenses have been reduced. So that's why when people are waiting to get a royalty statement, one, they have to take out whatever advance they paid you out of that net profit. They also take out, the editorial services, the publicity services, the marketing services, the shipping, the printing, all of those costs. So at the end of the day, they end up with a net profit number, and then you get a percentage of that. Obviously, if your book sells, somewhere usually between 8,000 copies in some places, maybe 20,000 copies in others, you can begin to see significant royalties. If you have a smaller selling book, you likely won't see significant royalty statements. The one area where you might is off of subrights. So I can say, I did have an independent publisher, but I had a very traditional publishing deal for my first book. And where I actually saw the biggest payments was from foreign rights sales, because we did some good foreign rights on that book, and I saw money from there. So that is what a traditional publishing deal looks like, and a traditional publishing process. So getting an agent, that is a big step on the path to publishing. And agents are looking for a couple of things. One of my former editors once said to me that more than anything else, in order to sell a book, it's not about talent, it's not about platform, it's all about timing. And I would say that really shows up with the agents. Agents are looking for the thing that they know they're going to be able to sell. Now, here's the other piece about traditional book publishing, is that it can take a really long time to see your book out there. I have a client right now who just was told that her book that they're looking to sell her book in fall of 2025. She's like, we both laughed. We're like, fall of 2025? Who even knows who is she going to be in fall of 2025? That's crazy. But that's what traditional book publishing looks like. So for agents, they're really looking to see, and I just got off the call with somebody who said, an agent said, tell her what she thinks the hot idea is going to be in 3 to 5 years, because that's really when her book is going to be published, right? So agents are looking for that. They're looking for that thing that I think this is going to be hot. I know I could sell it in the next year. I know publishers are going to love it. I know that not only are publishers going to love it when I try to sell it to them in a year, but that an audience is going to want to read it when it ultimately gets published in 18 months to 2 years, even after that fact, right? So you're really looking for that sort of like hitting the spark at the right moment. But this is where talent comes in, right? Being able to tell a beautiful, powerful story can engage everybody. And I always say to folks, and we'll talk about platform a little bit in this next hour, and I will also slow it down because I realize that we've got time. Usually when I'm doing these, I don't have the luxury of that. But before we get into platform, really the main thing is being able to engage an agent, engage a publisher in your content, make them interested in what you're having to say, but also recognizing that it's timely, it's powerful, it's beautiful, and it has meaning to you. So a lot of times when I'm working with people, I have this term that I created a few years ago called grab the mic, which is really about meaning, impact, and confidence. The book has to mean something to you. It has to be a telling of your truth, no matter what it is, even if it's fiction, right? It's offering some kind of worldview that is intimate to your experience of life, and also allows you to connect to readers through their own experiences of life. The other piece is impact, right? And that impact can be like, I want to sell 100,000 copies. That's awesome, right? Your impact might be that you're actually trying to push for some kind of advocacy or change in the world. And maybe your impact is that you just want to make people laugh, right? But understanding what you hope your book will ultimately do is, when it gets into marketing pitch language, that makes it really easy. Your agent understands what your book is for. Why are they publishing it? Why are people investing time and energy and resources and money in your book? Because this is the impact it's going to have once it's published. And then finally, confidence. And that's really like the big thing that I always try to work on with people, because it is the hardest thing. If you've ever tried to publish anything in your life, or write anything in your life, or do really anything in your life, right? it is filled with no's. There are a lot of no's in book publishing. And those no's can be really powerful, and they can teach us a lot, and they help us to grow, and they can also break us and say, never mind, I'm never doing this again. And really, being a writer is about persisting despite all the no's. I frequently say that, writing is 50% doubting yourself and 50% overcoming that doubt. And sometimes that doubt can be instilled by others, whether that's professionally or personally. I always say, don't have your mom read your book, right? You might have a fantastic relationship with her, and then she's going to love every word, which is probably not the feedback you need. Or maybe you have a more complicated relationship with her, and then she's not going to love every word you wrote, and that's also going to not be the feedback you need. So, it really is, though, about taking your work out there and believing in it. And I watched this really beautiful video from Rick Rubin yesterday that I want to share. That's really all about believing in the work, believing in it for the sake of the work, not for how people are going to respond to it, but because this is the thing you have to put out there. And I think that's ultimately how people connect into the confidence of their work and keep going despite the long, hard road. So I always tell people that I am not somebody that's going to make writing a book sound easy, and if that's what they're looking for, they might want to work with somebody else. And that's only because I know how hard it can be, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I have clients sell book proposals and projects all the time and get really lovely advances. That is part of the deal. And I have other people who have experienced years of frustration. And I've been both. I mean, I sold one book in like 5 minutes, it felt like. And then I had my book that's coming out this year. I am actually publishing through Rise Books because I couldn't find a publisher for it, or at least not one in any normal amount of time that I was willing to hang out and wait. But so it is, book publishing is filled with disappointment. And so I will, towards the end of this hour together, read to you from a book where an author talks about all of his trials and tribulations of selling books. But going back to sort of the process. So when you take something out to an agent, you're trying to attract them through your meaning, attract them through your impact, attract them through your confidence. And so that agent process usually begins with one of two things. If you are writing a book, a narrative nonfiction book, so this means it is not memoir and it is not a novel. It's everything else, okay? So we can make that real simple. If you are not writing memoir, you are not writing a novel, you likely need a book proposal. Now, I know memoir can be really funky, and a lot of times, often I work with people in the awkward genre of teaching memoir, where it is memoir, but it does have more of a message. You could shelve it in memoir, you could maybe shelve it in self-help. Maybe you're still figuring it out as you're writing it. And sometimes for those folks, you might need a book proposal and a full manuscript. But if you're writing in fiction or memoir, unless you have a really massive platform, you likely will need a full manuscript to sell those books. So for everybody else, spirituality, history, self-help, personal development, collective liberation, any other sort of high concept book that you are writing, you are likely going to sell it on a proposal. And so we take those proposals to agents, and then ultimately those proposals go into publishers. And really it's a way for you to see, for you to show, okay, here's the book. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what a book proposal looks like, and then we'll get into the idea of what it looks like to work on a full manuscript and query letter and what agents are likely looking for. We'll talk a little bit about agent submissions. So with a proposal, there are lots of different templates for proposals out there. I personally use one that I crafted years ago when I was working with an agency. I find that most agents appreciate and like it. And it is basically broken down into 4 sections. One, the overview, which is a 4 to 6 page pitch for your book, which basically describes, here's the book, here's who I am, here's why people want to buy it, here's some content in the book, here's why I'm the person to sell it, and here's why people ultimately need this book, right? So you can kind of look at that as 6 different sections if you want. But I mean, for each proposal, I really look at them very individually. Sometimes we have more storytelling in that overview. Sometimes we have like, really kind of firm concepts. We might even throw in activity. We might make it more fun and interesting. I've had oaths and promises and contracts in the, fun and for free, not real contracts in the overview. So there's lots of ways to get creative, but at the end of the day, those are basically the pieces that you were trying to share with an agent or publisher. The second part of the book proposal is really the marketing piece. And this is where, you're sharing your bio and you're sharing your platform, which we'll discuss further in a moment. You're sharing your platform. You're sharing all the ways that you could sell this book. In terms of, could you do speaking tours? Do you have corporate contacts? Where have you already been published? Where could you get published? Are there podcasts you can be on? Also looking to leverage your own social media network. If you have a social media network, what does that look like, right? So it's all those different pieces. Traditional media, do you have contacts there? Or do you think this book would do well in certain areas, book clubs, etc.? So really we're just breaking down that this is the stuff I already have to support this book, to get it out there. And then these are the areas in which I know I could get it out there, whether or not you have those contacts. And then finally, the last piece of that marketing section is going to be talking about the comparative titles and including that. Usually in there too, we'll have a bit about audience. I usually like to open up my platform with like, here's the audience for this book. And so they get a real clear sense of who this book is ultimately going to be marketing to. And so we have that as part of the plan as well. And then the third part is the chapter summaries. So that's where we break down each chapter. We have a table of contents, and then we get into the summary for each of those chapters. We try to make it about 1 to 2 paragraphs. I don't like to see it crest over into 2 pages, but if it does, it does. I mean, sometimes that's just necessary to get the content across. And then we go ahead and basically in that maybe you're doing a little storytelling, and then you're kind of breaking down some of the content, like in this chapter, we will, so you'll have those other pieces. And then you'll do that for each chapter. That usually ends up being, quite a bit of content, maybe let's say 15 to 20 pages of content right there. And then we get into 2 sample chapters. Now, usually I recommend doing either your intro or your first chapter as 1 sample chapter. If your intro feels very duplicative though of your overview, which sometimes it can be, right? Because it's like this opening pitch language, then you might want to use chapter 1. If that's not true for the overview and the intro, then feel free to use your introduction. And then you're going to use another chapter, maybe like, I always say like chapter 8. I just kind of grab that one. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be chapter 8. But something that's a little further into the book so that the agent and publisher can get a sense of how you're writing this, what it looks like, and all of that. So that is what a book proposal looks like. They usually end up being anywhere from 45 to 75 pages. I try to not have them go too much longer than that, nor shorter than that. Kind of the sweet spot is that 50 to 65 pages. And then you have a query letter that's attached that basically is like, here's sort of that main, and I will say my query letters often look like they've been copied and pasted from overviews, because they should to a certain extent, right? You're not rewriting the wheel. You're not reinventing the wheel or rewriting it. You're really just taking those pieces of like, okay, this is what the book is. This is who I am. This is why people need to read it. This is how I'm going to sell it. Please read my proposal. Would love to set up some time for a call. And so we get those pieces out there. The other option is that you are doing something that's memoir or fiction, and you need to have a full manuscript. Now, you're not typically submitting a full manuscript, and we're going to get into agents and agent submissions in a minute. Hi, Melissa. We're going to get into agents and agent submissions in a minute, but first I would say, for the manuscript, you're basically, most people, absolutely. And if you want to DM me and let me know, I'm happy to share a template or a sample. So I just saw, Arya, I believe is the name, said, could you share your template for a book proposal or a sample? I'm writing a memoir. Absolutely. Just go ahead and DM me and I can help you out. So in terms of but as I was saying, for most memoir, you actually won't necessarily be doing a proposal. Now, I know there are some people that tell memoirists to do proposals, but, and this is where when you go through agent submissions, I don't see a lot of agent submissions that require that. What they want to see is actually usually the first 10 to 20 pages of your manuscript, and the same is true for fiction. So it's basically a query letter, and then it's including a writing sample. Sometimes that writing sample, they ask you actually to copy and paste it just directly into the email, or they might have an online portal, as more and more of them are doing, which makes a lot more sense than the weird, let me copy and paste this into an email situation. In terms of both fiction and memoir, they function a lot the same. That though the concept might be important, it's really all about the writing. It's how this story takes place. Do you draw your reader in? Do you keep your reader hooked? Because they're not there to be educated, they're there to be entertained. And I say that with a caveat, is that understanding that there's a lot of memoir, just as there's a lot of fiction that you wouldn't want to call it entertaining. It might be inspiring, but they're not just there to learn. They're there to go on a journey with you. And so an agent or a publisher really needs to see what that journey looks like. So in some cases, though, like I said, there are some memoirs that might have more teaching or high concept that do require a proposal. There are some agents still who might ask for a proposal for a memoir. So let's get into agents, agent submissions, and agent submission guidelines. So finding an agent. I typically share the same advice that a lot of people share. The best way to find an agent is to start to look for the writers that you love. And this goes back to those comparative titles in your book proposal. So when you're choosing comparative titles for your book proposal, I had an agent once that said, never use Glennon Doyle, never use Brene Brown, right? Don't use Stephen King, right? There is a chance you could be one of those authors one day, but likely no. That's a little bit like winning a lottery ticket. You might also win Powerball one day too. It's not outside the realm of possibility. It's just not highly likely, and that's okay. Those are massive authors that sell millions of copies. And for most authors, it's not unlike acting, right? There's a lot of actors. The bulk of the content we consume on TV and film are filled with actors whose names you barely know. And then there's 3 people whose names you know, right? Like if you look at the credits to any movie, you see 4 names you know and 100 you don't. And that's also the same with published authors. There are 4 names you know, and then there's 100 names you don't. That doesn't mean you're not going to buy their books, right? It doesn't mean you're not going to attend the movie. So there are so many authors out there that sell 10,000, 20,000, even 100,000 copies of a book who aren't necessarily household names. And those are the ones you want to find when you're looking for your comparative titles. So I usually tell people to use Amazon reviews as a good gauge of, sales. It's not absolutely accurate, but looking for someone who sold between 500 and has 500 and 5,000 reviews, I think is pretty fair. Maybe looking at somewhere around 1,000 reviews. So I will say, this is probably completely off, but I just presume that if you have about 500 reviews, you've probably sold about 5,000 copies. And if you have 5,000 reviews, you've likely sold 50,000 copies. That's not a hard math. That's my guesstimate. But I think it's just a good range to think about it that way, So if you have somebody with 1,000 views, they likely have sold, 10,000 copies. That is a good person to compare yourself to, or somebody who sold 50,000 copies. That's a nice range. If they have 50,000 reviews on their book, that is likely not the person to compare yourself to. It's also likely not the author whose agent you want to chase, because that agent is representing, some of the biggest names, right? So they're not really spending time catering to a new author. They don't have that kind of space to take on new clients. And they also you're not going to be their top priority, right? Their top priority is Brene Brown and Stephen King and Oprah Winfrey, right? That's who they're catering to. So you want to look for agents who are representing kind of small to mid-list authors who are definitely into career building with authors that are going to spend time and, offer you attention and give you what you need as a first-time author, presuming you're first time or even second time, if you're just, still building your career and you're not in this sort of, I've sold 50,000 copies of a book league. So look for those writers, look for their agents, get their book, which you should get anyway, check out the acknowledgments. There's look, if an author isn't acknowledging their agent in the acknowledgments, that's probably not an agent you want to go with. So every author knows to acknowledge their agent. And usually it says, thanks to my agent. So it's real clear. And then, and start building your list from there. There are a lot of wonderful list sites, and we're going to be building out in the Rise Writers community, actually, like agent lists that you can access that will have, content and information about agents and submission guidelines. So we're working on that in the Rise Writers community as well, if you're part of any of our groups. And so that, but it really starts there. Who is the right size? Who is the right type? Who are they representing? And then ultimately, what are they requiring in order for you to pitch to them? So for some of them, it might be that 10 pages of a manuscript and a query letter. For some, it might be proposal. For some, it might be online portal. For some, it might be completely different. But that's why I try to help people build out a book proposal that they can cut and paste into and use it in a variety of ways. And I have somebody right now that's doing submissions not to agents, but to independent publishers, and we'll speak about that next. And so they're going out to a set of independent publishers who are all requiring very different submission guidelines, but it's great. She's got her proposal, she actually has her manuscript, she has her query letter, and she can cut and paste and put it all into the sort of diverse submission guidelines without having to, rewrite or write anything from scratch. So, so again, you want to have all that content when you go out to agents so they can make a solid decision. Thanks, Fran. And just so everybody knows, if you're tapping in at any point, this is obviously going to continue to stay up on Instagram. And if you sign up for our newsletter, I'm also going to be sending out a recording of it for folks. So you'll have that there too. But I appreciate everybody stopping in and learning more about this. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this as our first monthly workshop is that I feel like there's definitely a lot of frequently asked questions when people come into my groups, and also a lot of confusion about how things work. And I think sometimes too, unrealistic expectations around book publishing and who gets book deals and what those look like. So I want to move into independent publishing and talk about that. And kind of put a little pin in traditional publishing. I will sort of end this by saying there are pros and cons to going with big four publishers. One, you get the pros, start there. You get a ginormous machine that obviously has a lot of leverage in the publishing community, who has a lot of contacts, who can help a lot with marketing and PR if they are so inclined, and we'll talk about that in the cons. Two, you're usually working with professional editors who've worked with a wide variety of published authors, including some really big names who they can submit your book to try to get you blurbs and really make you part of a writer's community. Some do that better and more so than others, but that certainly is an option. And if you end up with a big four publisher, look at who else they're publishing, see who you can connect with on your publishing list. It's kind of like being part of a family, and you get to decide how close you want to be to that family, but it really comes down to your own advocacy for your book. Another thing about it is that, yes, there are typically advances. No, those advances can run the gamut, and I always tell people, don't get too excited. It's really funny how even big advances begin to look like little money at the end of the day. And so those advances can be anywhere from, let's say $5,000 to $10,000 all the way up to $20 million because you're Prince Harry. He's the only one who's getting big fat checks, by the way. But even if you get what would be considered as a substantial advance for a first-time writer in this day and age would be somewhere between $30,000 to $50,000. So, and that would be awesome. Back in the day when I worked for Simon & Schuster, that actually like a $20,000 advance was pretty like typical for a new author. That's not so much the case anymore. But if you do have a solid platform, if you're a good fit for an agent takes you out to a publisher, that is usually your kind of starter advance. Now, if you have a bigger platform, let's say 100,000 followers, you might be able to get something more significant than that. And then there are times where people have smaller platforms, but they're really just, the timing is excellent for their content. What they're saying is so powerful, and they can get a more significant advance. But let's just say I'll try to make it simpler for myself. So let's say you get a $60,000 advance, which sounds freaking awesome, right? That $60,000 advance doesn't get paid all at once. It typically gets paid in 3 payments. And I recently heard of a publisher trying to do it in 5 payments, which I think is just like gross. But let's just say it's in 3 payments. You get paid the first amount. That's $20,000. Yes, there is a doggy. He's being very good. I was just on a Zoom call where he barked for like 30 minutes of it. He was being so annoying. But he's like chilling during this section. So that's Peter. He's very famous. If you're ever in any of my workshops, you will come to know Peter. He's a man dog. He like runs the house. So if you get a $60,000 advance, that first check will be $20,000. And that comes when you sign the contract. 15% of that goes to your agent. I don't know what 15% of $20,000 was that. 50%, that's $23,000, right? $3,000. I'm not a mathematician. So you get $17,000. Now you obviously figure out your taxes, how much you end up paying on that, expenses, you have your own career, you decide that. You don't get paid again until you deliver your manuscript, which could be like the next year. So you get another $17,000 at that point. And then maybe you hope that book comes out then within that next year, but it might not be until the 3rd year in, and then that's another $17,000. So even when it sounds like a significant advance of $60,000, you end up making about $15,000 a year. So I always tell people, like, one of the first expectations, right? Writing a book might make you money, but most likely it won't. What writing a book does is it opens you up to so many incredible opportunities, which is why if you're writing a book to make money, you ultimately will always be very disappointed. It really has to come from that meaning, that impact, and that confidence that I have a story to tell, and it's time for me to tell it, and that through that connection of writing, you're going to have impact in the world. Because that impact, and not to say, look, sadly, we all need money in the world. And I'm somebody who likes nice things. I want to make money. But I also know usually when I'm writing a book, that's not what's going to do it. Right. And it's awesome if it does. But anyhow, just that's sort of the reality of what advances look like in traditional publishing. And so, but it's still, obviously, I wouldn't be mad if somebody handed me $17,000 today. That would be amazing. So, and you have that support as you're writing to try to take some space, to use the money to invest back in your book. That's where an advance can be really helpful, right? Is that, you can maybe take some time off of work to write. You can hire an outside publicist. You can do a lot of different things with those funds that are ultimately going to help you to support the sales of the book and the growth of your platform and your work outside of the book. So the cons are obviously that at the end of the day, it is really hard to get a traditional book publishing deal. You usually do need a significant platform to get one. And the fact is unless you're a big author, it can be really easy to get lost in a big book publisher. Now, if you have a big book publishing deal, I always say you have to work even harder because the publisher really looks at it that you're doing 50% of the work and they're doing 50% of the work. And like any partnership, the more you do, the more they're inclined to do. The less you do, the less inclined they are to do. So if they're going to their marketing meeting on Tuesday morning and they're saying like, oh, the author booked this, and this, and their boss basically turns to them and says, what did we book? And they go, oh, we haven't booked anything yet, right? Like they're going to feel like an ass. So, by you going out and doing that marketing and getting yourself booked, it really pushes them to then come in and be like, and we got them this and this. They're doing this and we're doing that. And it really turns into this powerful collaboration. But it really, no matter what, I always tell folks, publishing a book is a lot like running a marathon. Everybody thinks, though, that marathon ends once the book comes out, and it doesn't. that is actually mile 13. So I don't know if you've ever run a marathon, but mile 13 freaking sucks. It's the moment where you're like, yes, I did it. And then you're like, holy shit, I'm only halfway there. So that is the same thing as publishing a book. And I won't get too into it today. We'll get way more into publishing and marketing, or writing and marketing, on another workshop. But that really is when the work gets started. And so traditional publishing. It has wonderful merits, and by traditional I mean Big Four, not independent. Big corporate publishers, that would be Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, St. Martin's, and I forget the name of that group now. It's like St. Martin's, Macmillan. It includes Farrow, Straus, and Giroux, and now Hachette, which was formerly Warner Books, that has like Little Brown and a bunch of sort of old famous imprints in it. It's now called Hachette. So those are the current 4 publishing houses. I don't think I'm missing one. Simon & Schuster and Random House did not actually merge, which is great, because then we would have only had 3. And I can't even, I forgot 5. There is 5. That's right. HarperCollins. I worked there. Like, just left them off the list. Sorry, HarperCollins. I was like, why is 4 not feeling right to me? So Big 5. So those are the Big 5s. Independent publishing. So I want to spend a couple minutes on that. And I will say that, in terms of my own experience in independent publishing, I helped to found a hybrid publisher, or helped to build a hybrid publisher many years ago. And then, approximately almost 3 years ago, I helped to found an independent publisher, Row House Publishing, that functions much like traditional publishing. So I will say hybrid publishing, can bridge over from everything like vanity publishing, where people are paying to be published, to a scenario that we actually do at Rise Books, where we don't offer an advance, but we do offer 50% profit share, which allows you to actually earn a lot more off of the book sales that you receive, but you are not in a traditional advance relationship. We do have an author's fund, however, at Rise Books, to help people so they can get a $2,500 stipend. If they need that support to help them write, they needed to take some time off, they want to be able to invest in, say, an outside PR agency, or they might be needing to pay for illustrations. And though we cover half the cost of that at Rise Books, sometimes when folks need to cover the other half of that cost, they can pull from that fund. So we try to make it equitable in the best way that we can, so it's not just a traditional hybrid, but offering that 50%. Row House, which is the independent publisher I helped to co-found years ago with Rebecca Barucki. They have a very traditional and amazing, advance. We called it a standard advance. I was like, what was the term for that? Standard advance, which is a $40,000 upfront advance, split over payments, and then 40% royalty rate on those books, which is incredible. And there are lots of other imprints too at Row House that have sort of diverse structures based on the imprint, and the size of the authors and their platforms. And so I hope I'm saying that right. I hope if Rebecca's on here, I know some of it has changed and I have not been a part of that. So I don't know exactly the details. So if you are watching, don't quote me on any of that with Row House, other than the standard advance that I know we both created. So, but obviously those are not the only independent publishing houses around. There are lots of phenomenal independent publishing houses. Obviously there are some in the self-help world that have been around for a long time, for better or worse. And some of these are great. Some of them are a little bit more problematic. There's Hay House, there's Shambhala Publications, there's Sounds True. And then there's obviously a lot in the literary space. There's Electric Literature, which I love. There's Red Hen Press, which is actually based in Los Angeles. There's, forgive me, the one up in Portland whose name I'm not remembering offhand. Just trying to kind of give some of the bigger literary ones. So there are a lot of fantastic independent publishers across the country. Some do general adult trade, which is actually Rise Books. We do sort of all genres. We do fiction and nonfiction. Some independent presses are obviously way more specific in terms of what they're publishing. I'm thinking of like Shambhala, which is obviously going to be more new age, nonfiction focused. I don't know if they do fiction, actually. So it just depends. But independent presses are amazing. And they usually, depends on the independent press. So some larger independent presses still require that you have an agent to submit. And so what we call that is solicited versus unsolicited submissions. So you will see they'll have a note, we do not accept unsolicited submissions. That means that you need an agent. So, as you're beginning to go down that road, bye Kate, thanks for joining. As you're beginning to go down that road, you can start to look into the different submission guidelines. And look, if you're looking at 10 independent presses and 8 of them don't require agents and 2 of them do, why give your 15% away, right? Like, go ahead and start submitting to the ones that don't require them, see how that goes. And then at the end, if you feel like, hey, I still want to submit to these other 2, you can go out and get an agent and submit, And that is another list that we are working on right now at Rise Writers for folks that are coming into our group. So I'm really terrible about pitching programs when I'm in the middle of these, but I will say if you're working on your memoir, we have our group class, 5 Months to Memoir, starting next week, August 3rd on Thursday. It runs 12 weeks. And as part of that group, we'll really be working on first drafts of memoirs to take you through not only the, how to sell your memoir, but how to write your memoir. And we'll be doing everything on crafts talks like storytelling and structure and dialogue and pacing. And really guiding you through the memoir writing process. And I think one of the most beautiful things about writing in community is that we really get to, 1, learn from each other, but also 2, create accountability. Not to mention friendship, right, Allison? Hi, Allison. You and I so need to touch base. I have like a long list of emails that I need to send out. I feel like it grows every day. There's not enough hours, I swear. Also, there's just a lot of children here all the time. That's all I can say. Working moms during the summer is just like, such a shitstorm. I don't know why. My kids have now learned that they can get out of camp by going to the nursing office twice in a day, and then I'm forced to pick them up where I look like a jerk bag. And I know they're not sick. I'm like, I know you're not sick, but now here I am bringing you home. Yeah. So it really is it's a fun challenge. So anyway, going back, and they distract just like that, right? So in terms of independent publishers, really it begins with your genre, right? And also authors you love, similar to the agents. So it really is about finding, the books that you love, those comparative titles, finding the companies you love too. And that can be a big part of it. Look into the people that you're planning to work with. And the same goes for agents, right? But it's kind of harder to figure out what an agent's deal is unless they have like an Instagram platform. And there are some kind of platform. Usually they're just like, these are the books I take. And by their interests, you might be able to identify whether they feel like a cultural fit as well. Hey, Tammy. I think, though, that in terms of book publishing, you can definitely see if they're a right fit based on the other books they've published, right? So does this feel like a catalog you want to be a part of? Does it feel like it's the right fit in terms of the size of your platform? Does it feel like it's the right fit in terms of your content? And, and does it, and take a look, maybe you can even figure out some of their editors and see who you would be directly submitting to, right? But you'll know, do you have that sense in your gut that this is the right home for me? And I'll go back, Catherine, I wish she was on here because I would be using her as an example. One of our authors from the last 5 Months to Memoir, she's going out to small independent publishers right now. And as she and I were looking at their website pages together, it was like, you could see her, I could literally see her on the page. I was like, this is your good company, right? So find your good company. And then begin to take a look at their submissions and figure out what makes the most sense for you in terms of, are you going to be sending full manuscript, 10 pages, proposals? What does that look like there? And the other piece of this, and this is true for both, big four, however many freaking big 5 publishing. I'm never going to get that number right. Big 5 publishing and also small independents. Like, who can you network with, right? Because book publishing is very much a who kind of industry. So can you connect with some of the authors? Look, as an author myself, when people come out and ask me questions, I am always happy to answer. I'm always happy to share my experience. And if you go to those authors and say like, hey, you know, I see you're published by so-and-so, or I see you're represented by so-and-so. I've got a book project. Do you think it would be a fit? Do you like working with them? You know, you can begin to build that relationship, and it doesn't have to be anything inauthentic, right? I mean, these are questions you should be asking. And what better person to ask than the already published author who's either represented or is being published by a company that you're interested in, you know? So, I mean, go out to those folks, and you can begin to build real friendships there, you know? And real friendships, yes, often turn into favors for friends, but you know, you don't have to go in with that, you know, with that angle necessarily, though. Obviously, we all try to help each other, and that's part of the deal. I mean, I get it when people come to me asking for a favor. I certainly don't feel like, what are you doing? And it's like, no, that's how we build a career in any industry. But certainly in something that is as competitive as book publishing, and also is like deeply connected. So those are, I'm going to finish with the pros and cons of independent publishing. And then I do want to spend a couple minutes here at the end talking about self-publishing. So definitely the pros of independent publishing is usually you can find independent publishers who are very much in alignment with your genre, your message, even down to your personality. There's just a lot more like niche in independent publishing. Likely you're going to get, hopefully, a lot more tailored support because you're not on a list with a million other people. And you're going to be able to build sort of deeper relationships with your editors, with the publisher, with publicity and marketing, and hopefully get more from them for that reason, you know, depending where you are at. And the other thing is obviously you get to be sort of outside of the major corporate structure, so you're not feeding Viacom's pockets, if that matters to you. Which, you know, I mean, look, I'm all about taking from the big guys too. So, you know, if they're willing to pay, let them pay. But it's also awesome to really be part of small independent publishing. The cons are obviously that there are advances still with, you know, Hay House can give a significant advance. I'm sure Shabala gets some good advances. Sounds true. Some of the big ones, even some of the big literary ones probably give some solid advances. But there are a lot of independent presses who give very small advances, more like stipend, like the 1,000 to 3,000 advance. That is kind of typical. And so you might find that, you know, what you're looking for is, you want more competitive money than what they have to offer. But on the other side of it, sometimes you can get a higher royalty rate with some of those independent publishers. So, you know, feel free, even if you don't have an agent, you can negotiate on your own behalf and try to get the best deal possible. The other thing is, though, they might have less staff. They might not have the same connections out there in the market in terms of media and publicity. And so you might be putting in as much, if not more, than you would be with a big publishing house. So, you know, that's something to consider as well. So it can sort of work to your benefit. It can also require more of you. But at the end of the day, much like a baby, right? I mean, this is ultimately your responsibility. And though you might have lots of wonderful support systems that can help you to write and develop and edit and publish and market and sell your book, you know, this is where we really get to show up for our work and for our creative journey. And so, thank you, friend. Good points. Yeah, I hope I saw you show up, and I hope it's helpful for you too. And so all those pieces are true for both, you know, independent publishers and traditional publishers. Where it is especially true, though, is in the world of self-publishing. So anybody who's worked with me knows I'm not a straight up fan of self-publishing. I think it can be really challenging unless you have the time, energy, resources, and platform to make it really successful for you. And for some people, they do. And look, if you're not planning to publish like a full-length 40,000 word to 100,000 word book, and you're just doing something like a pamphlet or some little small chapbook, I think it could totally make sense to independent publish. And let's say you've got I mean, I have writes books, but honestly, even if I was doing something small, like how to write a book in 50 pages, like I don't think I wouldn't need Simon & Schuster's distribution channels to do that. Like I would just put it out there and people would buy it like with a t-shirt, right? So if that's what you're planning to work on, that's totally fine. And that absolutely makes sense, you know, to do. And And I think that's less kind of traditional self-publishing. That's more just self-marketing through a, kind of an informal book. If you are writing a formal book, a book that is 40,000. Okay, it paused me due to low connection, which is such a joke. It's just mad at me for being on this long. If anybody's watching, if you could just tell me that my audio is still on, because I find that whenever Instagram pauses, it will drop your audio. I'm typing this into post. Is audio on? Okay, good. Thank you. I was like, I had this issue last week where then just audio got wiped in the middle and I was just chatting away. Thanks folks. So in terms of self-publishing, if you are publishing a formal book, self-publishing can be really challenging. Again, if you have a significant platform, awesome, right? You can move those copies on your own. Why would you even need a publisher? You can just kind of create your own publishing house and you can really get those copies out the door. But as part of, and there are plenty of folks who you can pay to do, to produce the book, to edit the book, to design a cover for you, to get it set up. There's print on demand, which is fantastic, which means you basically don't have to pay for the book until it sells. But it does limit distribution. So, if you're looking to publish a book that's going to end up in Barnes & Noble, that has the opportunity for national media, that is going to, be a quote traditionally published book in terms of its marketing and publicity capabilities, self-publishing can be limiting. And I will say this, I have a publishing house, Rise Books. We have distribution with Simon & Schuster. It's all really exciting. I am publishing my book first, and I have probably one of my biggest challenges is getting over, in terms of PR and marketing, the fact that it's not quote self-published, because I am the publisher. So I understand where technically it's self-published, but but it's being published by a legitimate publishing house that's publishing other books with a legitimate distribution deal with Simon & Schuster and staff on board. And it's not just me, selling these books online. But nonetheless, self-publishing, can have challenges. That said, again, if you're publishing something that is a little bit more informal, if you do have a lot of time, energy, and resources, and you can really launch it, there are a lot of wonderful pros to it. And then there are a lot of companies that I will say in the world of vanity publishing, and Rise Books has an imprint called Ascend Publishing where you can buy publishing packages. So if you are struggling to get a publishing deal, if you recognize that's not going to be available to you, but you are interested in paying to be published, we help folks. We help ghostwrite, edit, produce, publish, and then they are still distributed by Simon & Schuster. So we have a really fantastic arm for that called Ascend Publishing, that we have our first book coming out next October on that imprint, and really excited to get that moving and to offer that to folks. But it all starts with your book. It all starts with your content, and it ultimately all starts with your creative journey. And finally, I'm going to say this. Like I said, I was going to talk about platform, and like I said, there's a whole workshop on platform, so I'm not going to dive too far into it. But obviously it's the number one question. Platform is significant. I was talking to a very big editor a few months ago, and he goes, I would never not buy a book because of the size of someone's platform. And I'm like, that is true. But let's say you can only buy 10 books a year. Back in the day before social media, really, I would say about 6 of those spots were reserved for household names or people with very impressive backgrounds or extensive professional experience. But they weren't people who necessarily had access to media every day the way we do on social media. And 4 of those spots would usually be left for people that no one had heard of and that were just fantastic writers or had a fantastic idea. Now, 9 of those spots go to people with platforms, and 1 of those spots is left for the person who just has a fantastic idea or is an exceptional writer. So it's not to say you can't get your book published. And I really mean this more in traditional publishing. This is why, I really believe in small independents. I think they are filling the void for people who do not have significant platforms. Last summer I had an author go out to an agent who, that author has, I think at this point, almost 40,000 followers on Instagram. And the agent finally came back to me and said, look, it's just not a big enough platform. And that's not true. I also just had an author who has about 20,000 followers get a 6-figure deal. So it's not like a hard set thing, but it is a real challenge. And so, but the best part about content is content can build a platform. This is the schmucky part. I know it is the schmucky part, but it's also not it's not the end, right? It's just a hurdle. And so it's an annoying hurdle, but it's a hurdle that we all have to get over. And I will say this, Toby, because I know what you're working on. Like, literary memoir is definitely an area where there is less competition in terms of platform. Oh, Melinda, whenever I see somebody I owe something to, I'm on it. You're going to get it today, I swear. I've been, for everybody who's been working with me, I had like a crazy respiratory virus for the last 3 weeks. And I just was like coughing all day and could not work past like 3 p.m. I actually strained my rib cage. It was super fun. I'm one of those weird people that like, I have the weirdest medical shit. That's just been, since I was a kid, I always get the weird sickness that nobody else got. But my immune system just is a funny little thing. So, but anyway, going back to apologizing for owing people things. But the platform is just a hurdle, and so, and in certain genres, it's not as important in others, like obviously in personal development, obviously in spirituality, and sort of narrative nonfiction where there's a program. The publisher wants to see that you have evidence of your program's success. They want to see that, you've already had people following you and are interested in your work, have participated in your work before they go and platform you. So there's a reason for that. I mean, it's not all bad. It's not all schmucky. But if you're writing literary memoir, obviously that's not necessarily the same case. And really it's about the writing. So I'm glad to sort of finish on memoir and say this. If you are looking to write your memoir, 5 Months to Memoir starts next Thursday. We are having a flash sale today over the next 24 hours. Use the code RISE to WRITE to get 20% off. And I will put that in the caption. And we're really excited to have you as part of the Rise Writers community, even if you're just stopping in. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. But if you are beginning to work on your nonfiction book or your memoir, 5 Months to Memoir is a wonderful place to start, and an incredible starting point to finding your own path to publishing. So check out risewriters.com, or you can go to link in bio to find out more. And Toby is a double winner in our group. She's come twice, and it's just, it's a fantastic program for people who are really looking to write their book. So again, feel free to DM me with any questions, and we look forward to doing these once a month, hopefully on Zoom, but just starting this out on IG Live to really begin to go through the mechanics of book publishing and writing a book and building a platform and making the space to become a published author. So thank you for joining me, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.